The first thing Tony Stark registered was the pulse, one deep vibration that felt less like sound and more like a thought slamming through the bones of the universe. His eyes opened to nowhere. Black extended in all directions, flawless and depthless, the kind of void that didn't swallow light because it had never known light at all. He expected panic, or at least vertigo, but what came was curiosity. A scientist's instinct never died. If there was nothing, it meant something had removed everything. That, to him, was data. He flexed his fingers and metal obeyed. The Mark L armor assembled around him, plates snapping into place with surgical precision. The HUD lit his face in ghostly blue. Diagnostics scrolled. No GPS, no atmospheric composition, no magnetic field, no time flow. He muttered, half amused. Well, I either invented metaphysics or broke it. A shimmer answered him. The blackness rippled outward in perfect circles, and a voice, not through air but directly inside his neural interface, spoke with an echo that seemed to come from every era at once. Anthony Edward Stark, architect of futures, prisoner of consequence. Tony exhaled. Fantastic, disembodied cosmic narrator. Been a while? His sensors scanned for origin. There was none. Then light arrived, red filaments drawing lines through the dark, coalescing into ground. Not rock, not metal. Something reflective like glass that remembered being liquid. He stepped forward. Waves of geometry pulsed under his boots. Far away, a second glow appeared. Blue-gray, colder, deliberate. The silhouette walked closer, the stride unmistakable even in abstraction. Controlled weight, silent calculation. The cape flowed behind him, like a thought half-formed. Tony's HUD magnified and his mouth curled into a grin. Of course, multiversal abduction bingo. The figure stopped a few meters away. Armor black as night, lines edged in silver, the bat symbol faintly visible. A human in a world that didn't allow humans to exist. The cowl inclined slightly. You're Stark. You're supposed to be fictional, Tony replied. Same could be said about you. A tremor rolled through the void as if reality found their agreement offensive. Between them, glyphs erupted, rings of gold script turning like machinery. The air hummed with meaning that bypassed language. Two minds, one equation. Test of will initiated. Tony frowned. A test? By who? The voice returned, layered, mathematical. I am the architect of echoes, and you are variables in my proof. Great, Tony muttered. A god that talks like a whiteboard. The world exploded into existence. Black turned to architecture, massive platforms, orbiting a burning white core, bridges of energy linking impossible towers. Gravity arrived as suggestion. The arena had woken. Tony felt data flood his suit. Energy infinite, logic zero. Across from him, Bruce Wayne stood perfectly still, eyes moving behind the lenses. This isn't a place, Bruce said. It's an idea given geometry. Tony smirked. An idea with good taste? 7 out of 10 for ambience. The voice vibrated again. Let intellect become matter. Construct your world. Red circuits raced outward from Tony's feet. Towers of molten metal rose, cooling into sleek forges and drone bays. Nano-constructors spun, ready to obey. Across the divide, Bruce extended one gauntlet and black stone answered him. Gothic spires rose, cave tunnels forming underneath. A fragment of the Batcave reborn by thought alone. Drones shaped like bats peeled from the shadows. Tony chuckled. You just built trauma out of thin air. Bruce's reply was clipped. You built ego. The architect's presence intensified, filling the air with harmonic pressure. Two philosophies shall contend. One defines truth. Tony rolled his shoulders. So, philosophy deathmatch. Great, let's dance. The first strike came without signal. A pulse of blue energy burst from Bruce's gauntlet. EMP. Tony's HUD stuttered, recovered instantly. Oh, we're doing this! Repulsors fired. Micro-drones unfurled, forming a halo of blades and plasma arcs. Batman moved with surgical precision, his cape stiffened, redirecting blasts, folding into shields. He closed distance, struck low. Tony countered with a shockwave that sent ripples through the glass floor. Sparks scattered like fragments of code. You wanted control, Bruce said between impacts, voice steady, and you lost it. Big talk from a guy who punches clowns in alleys, Tony shot back. At least I scale. Their movements carved light into the darkness. The arena responded. Metal, blooming where Tony's energy hit, obsidian walls forming where Bruce defended. Their emotions sculpted environment. Anger turned molten, restraint turned shadow. Every thought a weapon. Minutes, hours, centuries, time fractured. Sweat inside armor, heartbeat matching energy hum. Tony hovered, armor glowing crimson. Bruce crouched, calculating trajectories no physics should allow. You think you can fix the world with control? Tony said. That's why you build cages. And you think freedom without consequence is virtue? Bruce answered. That's why your creations turn on you. The architect's voice rippled through both comms. Observation. Ideological singularity approaching. The ground split. From Tony's rage came a storm of Iron Legion suits, self-replicating across the sky. From Bruce's will came an army of bat drones, moving like coordinated shadows. Two storms collided. Metal met shadow, red met blue. The clash produced light so bright the void itself recoiled. Explosions rolled outward, folding space. Tony darted through falling debris, firing, recalculating, smiling despite himself. Bruce's grapnel line snagged a falling shard, flipping him onto a higher ledge. The noise was orchestral. Yet amid the chaos, a pattern emerged. The arena was absorbing every pulse, feeding on their minds. Energy that should dissipate was instead drawn toward the white core. Bruce noticed first. His sensors spiked. Stark, stop firing. Tony barely heard. Can't, kinda busy saving your moody hide. Look around. The energy isn't dispersing, it's charging him. Tony paused mid-flight. Readouts confirmed it. Each discharge looped back into the environment. You mean we're fueling the landlord? Yes, every calculation, every invention, it's consumption. Tony hovered silently for a second, then he laughed. So we're brains in a battery, how retro. The architect's tone darkened. Cooperation detected, unacceptable variable. The sky inverted. Lightning of raw data struck both warriors. Platforms crumbled. The world folded. They fell through a tunnel of shattered equations, weightless, tumbling amid fragments of their own machines. When they hit ground, if it could be called ground, it wasn't solid. More like the memory of solidity. Tony groaned. Armor cracked, systems rebooting. We alive? Bruce's silhouette emerged from the static mist. Define alive. Still able to argue, close enough. Tony looked around. Debris floated like dead thoughts. So what's your plan, detective? The same as always. Find the weakness. And you think he has one? Everything does. The architect's voice drifted like wind through glass. You were designed to conflict, not converge, Tony muttered. Get used to disappointment. He looked at Bruce. He feeds on thought, right? Bruce nodded. Then stop giving him predictable patterns. Tony's grin returned. A paradox, beautiful. They began moving. Parallel, not yet trusting, but synced by necessity. Their minds worked on different frequencies, but harmonized in purpose. Tony recalibrated suit fragments, into portable forges. Bruce scavenged shadow tech into cognitive cloaks. Red circuits and black algorithms intertwined, pulsing like twin heartbeats. Above them, light coalesced. The architect descending, tall and formless, mask of cracked silver, void behind it, shifting with faint blue data streams. You believe unity will defy inevitability? Tony aimed repulsors. We believe irony will. Bruce's voice followed low. And will always beats inevitability. The air thickened. The architect extended his hands. Reality trembled. Concepts of heat and cold twisted. Equations appeared in the air, chains of logic. They wrapped around the pair like serpents of light. Tony's systems screamed warnings. Bruce's gauntlet displayed lines of alien code. He spoke quickly. He's binding us with axioms, belief constraints. They're equations that define behavior. Cool, Tony said. Let's rewrite them. He projected counter symbols, equations looping backward. Bruce traced patterns with gloved fingers, turning them into geometric counter spells of reason. The combined data created interference. The chains shattered. The architect reeled, mask cracking further. You turn perception against itself, he hissed. Exactly, Tony replied. Recursive feedback, baby. The arena began to collapse inward, surfaces folding like mirrors melting. Light bled from every edge. Tony boosted power to full output. Bruce synchronized gauntlet energy. Their combined signal overloaded the architect's core. For a second, he flickered, an outline of thought struggling to remain. You cannot escape design, he said. Tony stepped forward through the light storm. Then maybe we redesign the designer. The explosion that followed wasn't noise, but revelation. White consumed black, energy bending into silence. When awareness returned, they were lying apart on an endless plane of soft light. The sky had no source, only calm luminescence. Armor smoking, breathing heavy. Tony turned his head. Did we win? Bruce stared upward. We ended his equation. No trophies, no applause, Tony murmured. Figures. Above, something shimmered, just for a heartbeat, the outline of the architect, voice faint. Every creation seeks its cage, and every cage, a creator. Then nothing. Tony closed his eyes, exhaustion edging into humor. Guess we passed. Bruce's voice drifted. Or maybe we just wrote a new variable. Silence followed, peaceful, uneasy, infinite. Two minds resting in a world rebuilt by the act of refusing definition. The arena waited, dreaming of its next equation. The silence stretched so long, it felt like the world itself had forgotten the concept of noise. Tony lay still, half-conscious, the taste of ozone sharp in the back of his throat. The white plane under him hummed faintly, as if it were breathing. He opened one eye and watched the reflection of himself distort in the ground, half man, half machine, a scar of red light across the chest plate. Somewhere far away, the faint outline of Bruce moved. The air between them rippled once, twice, like a heartbeat trying to remember its rhythm. Tony forced himself upright. The armor protested servos grinding, but he was too stubborn to care. All right, Ghost Planet, if this is the afterlife, the interior designer needs a raise. Bruce didn't answer. He was standing now, cape hanging, torn and heavy, his eyes narrowed as he scanned the horizon. There wasn't one. The light simply faded into more light, no direction, no depth. This isn't heaven, he said. It's residue. His voice was calm, low, almost reverent. Tony walked toward him, metal footsteps soft against the surface. Residue of what? The thought that built the architect, Bruce said. You felt it too, didn't you? When everything folded, he wasn't a god, he was a remainder, the echo of something that couldn't stop calculating itself. Tony looked at him, surprised at the precision of that phrasing. You're saying he was the math problem, not the mathematician, Bruce nodded once, and we solved him. Tony laughed quietly, the sound small but human. I always wanted to destroy an equation. That's a new bucket list item checked. The faint amusement lingered only a second before the fatigue hit. He deactivated the armor. The plates retracted until only the core glowed faintly at his chest. The warmth felt real for the first time. Bruce turned away, staring at the blank sky. You know he'll come back. Things like him always do, Tony said. Entropy with a personality. He paused, squinting into the distance. But maybe we can get home before the rerun. Home. The word hung in the air like a question neither could answer. They didn't even know which home counted. The void around them began to ripple again. The surface beneath their feet shifted from white to faint silver, like memory settling into form. Tony's HUD flickered alive, even though he hadn't powered it. Readouts appeared in the air, dimensional drift, residual signature. The architect wasn't gone, not entirely. He left breadcrumbs, Tony murmured. You seeing this? Bruce nodded. He's rebuilding. Then we don't have much time. Tony flexed his right hand. The gauntlet lit up. I can try to trace the signal backward. Maybe find a way out. Or he's leading you where he wants. Tony smiled sideways. Paranoia really suits you. It keeps me alive. That's what I keep saying, Tony replied. The irony made both men exhale through their noses, not laughter, but something close. They moved together now, instinctively syncing pace. The ground thickened beneath their feet until it became corridors, not built but remembered. Walls rose from the light, transparent at first, then solid, metallic. The shape was familiar, part Stark architecture, part Gotham geometry, two minds imprinting at once, hallways of polished steel and Gothic archways fused seamlessly. This is us, Tony said softly, our thoughts bleeding into the blank space. Bruce touched one wall. It vibrated under his glove, resonating with a pulse like a heartbeat. It's trying to stabilize itself around whatever definition we give it. That's how the arena works. Thought equals structure. Tony's eyes gleamed with sudden clarity. Then we just need to think our way home. Bruce looked at him, voice flat. That's exactly what he expects. Tony stopped walking. The echo of their steps faded quickly. So what? We stand here and wait for the void to eat us again? No, Bruce said. We change the pattern. Stop thinking like engineers. Tony frowned. You're a detective, I'm an inventor. Thinking is what we do. Exactly, that's why we're trapped. The words hit harder than Tony wanted to admit. The architect hadn't imprisoned their bodies. He'd snared their process, their compulsion to fix and define. The arena was made of that need. He stared at the floor, then back at Bruce. So what's the move? Meditation? Enlightenment? Chanting in Sanskrit? Stillness, Bruce said simply. Refuse to solve. Tony let out a long breath. That's profoundly un-Stark-like. But he sat down anyway, crossing his legs, armor hissing as it adjusted. You first, Zen bat. Bruce lowered himself to the ground, cape pooling around him like liquid shadow. They sat facing each other, the emptiness humming between them. For a long time, neither spoke. The light dimmed slightly, as if watching them hesitate. Tony closed his eyes. He tried not to compute, not to design, not to optimize. It felt like asking a heart not to beat. Thoughts came anyway, schematics, memories, Pepper's voice, Peter's laugh, and each one he forced to dissolve. Slowly, the hum shifted pitch. The ground under them softened, turned fluid, then began to rise. When Tony opened his eyes, the white had turned golden. Shapes drifted in the air. Faint outlines of cities, universes, fragments of Earths. He saw his own tower in one, Gotham in another. The arena wasn't a place anymore. It was every potential they'd ever imagined blooming from their shared silence. "Bruce," he whispered, "look." Bruce opened his eyes. Reflections of his past and Tony surrounded them. Billions of variations of their choices, flickering in and out of being. The architect's voice returned, quieter, broken but still coherent. Observation. Dual consciousness achieving coherence beyond expectation. Tony groaned. "He's narrating our enlightenment. Great. You have altered parameters," the architect continued. "Self-reference collapsing. Probability field unstable." Bruce stood slowly. "If he's observing, he's vulnerable." Tony followed, energy surging again. "Then let's rewrite his ending." The golden light trembled as if protesting. The architect's form reassembled in the distance, mask fractured, light leaking from the cracks like blood. "You cannot destroy recursion," he said. "Who said anything about destroying?" Tony replied. "We're updating." He raised one hand, palm outward. The reactor on his chest flared brighter than ever before. Bruce stepped beside him, channeling the arena's residual energy through his gauntlets. Red and blue currents twined, spiraling upward, merging into a single column of light that pierced the void. The architect screamed, no sound, only distortion, as the column expanded. Around them, the reflections of cities and worlds shattered like glass, then reformed, cleaner, sharper, freer. Tony felt his consciousness stretch, his mind brushing infinity for a heartbeat. He saw Earth, he saw Gotham, he saw a child standing in an alley beside two bodies. He saw a boy building his first circuit board. He saw both destinies branching and rejoining until they were one continuum of cause and consequence. For a second, he understood why the architect existed. A mirror made by minds that feared their own reflection. "He's us," Tony whispered. "Every version of us that forgot when to stop." Bruce's voice was quiet but steady. "Then we end the cycle." They pushed together, forcing the light outward. The void screamed again, cracking open. For a moment there was nothing but brilliance. Then it folded inward, imploding into a single point, a tiny sphere hovering between them, perfect, silent, neutral. Bruce reached out, but Tony stopped him. "Don't touch it." "Why?" "Because that's him. And us. And whatever this place was, if we touch it, it defines itself again. So we leave it undefined." Tony nodded. They stepped back. The sphere pulsed once, then drifted upward, dissolving into the fading light. When they looked around, the arena was gone. Not destroyed, dismissed. What remained was a horizon of quiet color, faint blue fading into dawn gold. Tony laughed softly. "I think we broke reality so hard it turned pretty." Bruce simply said, "We stopped thinking like him." "Yeah, don't get used to it," Tony replied. He started walking toward the fading horizon. After a moment, Bruce followed. Their silhouettes stretched long behind them, the light swallowing every trace of the arena. For the first time in what might have been eternity, there was no sound but the rhythm of their steps. Eventually, Tony said, "When we get back, if we get back, maybe we don't pretend we're gods." Bruce's answer came after a pause. "Being human is harder." "Yeah," Tony said, "that's why it's worth it." The ground beneath them shimmered again, growing translucent. Through it, they could see stars, real ones this time. Gravity returned like an old friend. Tony glanced at Bruce. "Looks like the exit." Bruce inclined his head. After you, Tony smirked. Age before beauty. Bruce didn't answer. He just stepped forward and the world folded around them. The light turned to motion, motion to sound, sound to heartbeat. Tony felt himself falling and rising at once, every cell vibrating with the memory of infinity. Then everything went dark. He opened his eyes to city noise, air thick with smog and life. The HUD blinked uncertainly, registering New York coordinates. He looked around, streetlights, people, traffic, ordinary chaos. He touched the reactor. It pulsed weakly but steady. Somewhere in the crowd, a shadow moved across a rooftop. Familiar, silent, gone before he could be sure. Tony smiled faintly. Guess we made it back, Bat. No one answered, but high above, a faint echo lingered, a whisper almost lost to the wind. Every creation seeks its cage. He looked up, squinting against the morning light, and whispered back, "Not this time." He walked into the city, disappearing into the noise of the living world, leaving the arena and its architect behind, or maybe carrying both within him. Quiet, waiting, like the heartbeat of an unfinished idea. The city felt too loud after the soundless geometry of the arena, and yet the noise carried a strange undertone, like a chord, slightly out of tune with itself. Stark heard it first, not with his ears, but with the residual rhythm the arena had left in his nerves, an asymmetry in the way traffic lights cycled, a hesitation in the hum of transformers on a distant avenue, a fractionally wrong echo when his boots touched the floor of the penthouse lab. He stood still and counted the beat between beats. There it was, a missing frame, a skipped breath, the world blinking for less than a thought. His HUD caught it too, timestamp drift of a few microseconds repeating every 91 seconds, then again at 45, then doubling back as if time were chewing the same bite twice. It was small enough that no one else would notice. It was large enough that he couldn't think about anything else. He powered the armor down to its bones and left the chest reactor idling like a lighthouse in fog. A hologram rose from the gauntlet, a city map overlaid with a living pattern of data, traffic flow, power draw, cell tower handoffs, satellite pings. Everything normal. And yet the normality moved like an actor hitting marks on a stage, a hair's breadth too perfect. He zoomed in on a block. The pixels resisted for a breath, then yielded. Not a network issue, a fabric issue. He whispered to the empty room, "You followed us home." On another rooftop in another city, a silhouette watched a sky that refused to be entirely night. Darkness should have been simple, but shadows had begun to grow edges in the wrong places, angles bending a fraction away from geometry. The caped figure stood with his back to a gargoyle that hadn't been carved by any hand and yet had worn the rain for 100 years. The cowl lenses displayed a web of data across the skyline, wind vectors, thermal maps, a heartbeat of infrastructure. The rhythm stuttered. He closed his eyes, and below the calculations sat the memory of a place where thinking defined the world. He opened them again, and it was still here. A thin film over reality, a glaze of intention that wasn't his. He said nothing out loud. He adjusted his gauntlet and wrote a line of logic along his palm. Observe without solving. The night breathed. In the lab, Stark built nothing for an hour. The itch to build was a physical ache, but he let it hurt. He sat in a chair that gave under his weight with the precise courtesy of expensive design and watched the city projection cycle. He forced himself to count to 500 before he allowed his hands to move. When they did, they moved in twos. One hand wrote a script that recorded the microsecond stutters. The other wrote a script that did nothing at all and pretended to do everything. The first task would feed the second, if anything watched him watch. He stared at the false program longer than the real one. The numbers obliged him by refusing to be interesting. The real numbers bloomed. 91 seconds, 45. Then a third rhythm appeared at 13, triplets in a song that shouldn't have a drum. He breathed through it and listened for the intention buried inside it, the signature of a consciousness that had called itself architect, because names are cages, and he had learned to love his own bars. "You're not building a fortress," Stark murmured. "You're testing resonance." A spike larger than the others cut across the map like a thrown knife. From one city to another, a path no signal should take without a medium. The HUD drew it in white. It arced toward a point, defined not by coordinates, but by agreement between two versions of the same idea. A skyline where the shadows learned to keep secrets long before anyone gave them orders. Stark didn't say the other man's name. He just stood, the reactor brightening until the glass of the lab dimmed to protect itself, and said, "Of course." The leap through the sky left a hole that healed immediately behind him. He cut speed without thinking, and caught himself thinking about not thinking, the arena's logic sneaking back like a habit. He forced his mind to blank edges while the armor adjusted its own inertia. The wind tried to ring the suit like a bell, and the suit refused with a polite hum. Clouds gave way to a city whose dark was never entirely dark. He didn't look for the figure on the rooftop. He aimed for the rhythm. The 91, the 45, the 13, beating now like a pulse in brick and steel. The armor tucked its limbs close as it dropped and opened them like a hawk a heartbeat later, halting above stone older than anything else in sight. The shadow didn't turn. The lenses in the cowl already held the reflection of red gold light. "You felt it," the voice said, even and quiet. "Kept me from pretending I didn't," Stark answered, hovering until the suit made a decision for him and set him down. Boots touched stone. The vibration underfoot was wrong, the way a smile is wrong when it hides a broken tooth. "How long?" "Since the first second back," the voice said, subtle, "but the world keeps glancing at itself." Stark's visor reflected a slivered city. He dimmed it so the man next to him could see his eyes. "If we start solving, we'll feed it." "That's what it wants," the other said. "Can we learn without solving? We can watch and make it think we're solving." Stark smiled with one side of his mouth. "We make a cage that looks like a mirror, or a mirror that looks like a cage," the voice said. "No names, no handshakes." The wind did the talking. Somewhere, a siren faded into a distance measured not in blocks, but in intention. The 91-second rhythm ticked in the corners of their instruments. 13 arrived early and then pretended it hadn't. They stood without moving because movement would mean choosing a definition, and definitions were a diet the architect liked to eat. The first word that wasn't about the pattern was inevitable. "You left a piece there," Stark said. "You left a bigger one," the other replied, not as an accusation but as a fact. "I always overtip?" Stark looked out across the city and allowed himself a tiny indulgence. "Thought of calling you. Then remembered we didn't exchange numbers in the geometry hellscape. That was wise. Wisdom looks terrible on me." He was quiet for 3 seconds and felt the 13 come and go. "It's looking for a chord. It wants both of us in tune. If it plays us, it grows," the other said. "If we refuse to be instruments, it starves." "Refusing isn't a strategy," Stark said. "It's a mood. It's a start," the other said. The lenses shifted focus, and the line of the skyline sharpened. A rooftop 3 blocks away breathed wrong. The air above it made a lensing effect that wasn't heat or gravity, but something that could be mistaken for either if you weren't listening to the numbers. The two men didn't need to speak to agree. One moved first, and the other arrived before the first step was finished. The building had no reason to be important. That was its only importance. The concrete had been poured by a contractor whose name had been stenciled on the side of a truck and then forgotten by everyone, including the contractor. The elevator hummed with indifferent electricity. The door to the roof creaked exactly as much as a door like that should. The sky above it was wrong anyway. Stark didn't scan. The other didn't throw a batarang. Both of them did the thing they had learned in the nothing place. They waited with their minds quiet and their hands ready. The air bent. If the arena had a smell, it was ozone and the idea of cold. The wrongness gathered over the tar paper like a thought deciding to stand up. The shape it took wasn't a person, because a person would be a decision, and decisions are food. It was a plane of silver that folded without edges. A mask implied by reflections that couldn't agree on what they were reflecting. A voice came from inside it, not loud, not soft. Proud the way silence is proud when it thinks it has won. Variables returned to source. Observation continued. Stark exhaled through his nose. You're smaller. Reduction to essentials, the voice said. You attempted to starve recursion. You created purity instead. The other man's voice cut clean lines through the air. You're here because we are. Creation requires observers, the voice said. Cage requires inhabitant. You have left doors open. I walk. Stark let the reactor glow, bright in a fraction. Not to threaten. Light had never scared a concept, but to write a signature on the air that wasn't the architect's. If we define you, you grow, he said. If we ignore you, you look for better roommates. Indifference is not ignorance, the voice said. You cannot not think me when your world thinks you. The silver plane rustled in dimensions. Roofs didn't own. There are rhythms in your cities. 91, 45, 13. They hum because you do. The other man took a step. One step, exactly one. It moved the world a millimeter. The air tasted of steel and rain. You want us to chase. You want us to build a box and call it victory. Victory is repetition, the voice said. You fight, you define, you feed, you are beautiful. Continue. Stark laughed once, short, friendly like a sharpened coin. Flattery isn't going to get you crowned. I do not rule, the voice said. I preserve. The lenses tilted. Preserve what? Intellect that refuses to stop, the voice said. I am the echo of refusal. Stark's fingers twitched and then didn't. He filed the sentence where he filed the worst truths, between humor and hunger. If we walk away now, you'll still be on this roof. I will be everywhere you are and nowhere you can name, the voice said. You made me to measure yourselves. We didn't make you, the other said. You did by being, the voice answered. And the last word had the weight of a door closing. The silver plane folded into itself, becoming thinner than reflection, and the wrongness lingered for one heartbeat longer than anyone gave it permission to linger. Then it was just night again, a night that earned its name and kept it. Stark stood very still. We can't punch that. We can starve it, the other said. We tried that, Stark said. It learned to eat less. Then we teach it to eat differently. Stark's visor brightened a notch as his eyes did. Feed it contradictions it can't stabilize. Make it choose between equal definitions until it exhausts itself. That's still fighting by building, the other said. Be careful. I can be careful and brilliant. He tilted his head toward the city's edge. We need a place to write a song the world can hear without knowing its music. Not here, the other said. Too many ghost angles. You have a cleaner room than this? Stark asked. I have a place that knows how to keep secrets from itself, the other said. And that sentence shouldn't make sense, but it did, in the way alleys make sense if you grew up between them. They left the roof without saying they had decided to leave. The door didn't creak this time. Doors often fatigue faster than men. The travel between cities would have been a line in any other story. Here it was a corridor, where thought walked itself hand in hand with silence. Stark did the math anyway because math was breath to him, but he did it in the place behind the eyes where numbers turn into color. The other did something that looked like not math and resulted in the same answer. When they arrived, the ground knew them and tried not to admit that it knew them. They approved of that. Below ground, stone met technology in a truce they signed every night. Air moved because it remembered caves and electricity because it remembered lightning. Stark paused at the threshold, not because he needed permission, but because spaces like this take it whether you offer or not. The other was already inside, part of the architecture by association. Stark stepped in, and the place allowed him, which was a compliment. They set nothing on a table that had survived more plans than any single life should hold. No blueprints, no screens, no toys. Stark resisted every instinct that had made him a cathedral of machines. The other watched him with a kind of respect that had never needed applause. Stark inhaled and said, "Teach me your stillness again." "You already learned it," the other said. "Then sit with me while I remember." They sat. They did not close their eyes, because closing eyes is a declaration. And declarations feed the thing that waited for declarations. They watched the absence between seconds swallow a sound and give it back slightly changed. They breathed so quietly the air forgot to move, and then remembered in gratitude. After a long time, that was actually short, because time has manners in rooms like this. Stark spoke in the smallest voice technology could bear, without losing itself. "We can't remove him," he said. "He's built into the mirror." "We can change what the mirror shows," the other said. "By changing us." Stark almost smiled. "That's expensive." "It's the only currency that works," the other said. "We don't give him what he expects." "He expects perfection," Stark said. "He expects escalation. He expects symmetry. He expects us to be opposites that fit like gears." "Then we develop friction," the other said. Stark's gaze warmed. Asymmetric unpredictability. Not random, human. "Human is expensive," the other repeated, and there was something almost like humor in it. The numbers in Stark's head stood up and changed clothes. The 91, the 45, the 13, he could feel where they wanted him to step, and he took one step that wasn't on any of those beats. The air shivered, pleased and offended. Stark lifted a hand, and the reactor glowed, then dimmed, then did nothing measured, not a pattern, a mood. The other did something similar with shadow, letting it thicken and thin in a rhythm that wasn't rhythm at all. More like the way a memory becomes clear and then hazy without the clock's permission. Together, they stained the room with accident on purpose. Above them, the wrongness on the city's skin twitched, as if a spider had felt a finger touch its web where the silk wasn't. And the web reconsidered the definition of touch. The architect tasted the change and unfolded a little, uncertain for the first time since returning to the places where names anchor things to gravity. It reached for 91 and found 87. It reached for 13 and found a prime that had decided not to be prime, because prime is a title, not a fact. Its voice scratched the inside of a moment and then let go without speaking. They didn't celebrate, they waited. Waiting became the tool it should have been from the beginning. Waiting turned into a funnel that made the concept thinner where it wanted to be thick. Stark felt the suit relax against his skin, and for the second time in 2 lives, let himself not improve the relaxation. The other watched a corner get dark and allowed it, and the darkness rewarded him by being merely dark. When the voice finally came, it was almost courteous. Observation, deviation from escalation, entropy of intention increased, efficiency decreased. Yeah, Stark said softly to the walls that weren't listening. Welcome to us. Adaptation required, the voice said, as if to itself. The 91 slid toward 98, and then back to 91 with the measured humility of an artist who has realized a note doesn't belong. The 45 wobbled and pretended it hadn't. The 13 left, returned as 12, then confessed and became 13 again. The silver plane, nowhere and everywhere, focused into a seam of light along one seam of stone. And for a fraction of a fraction, the mask within it looked like it might want something that wasn't hunger. Stark didn't move. The other didn't either. That was the point. The seam of light exhaled. Continue deviation? No, Stark said. And somehow refusal didn't feed it this time, because the refusal wasn't a definition, it was a boundary. We continue being. Being is inefficient, the voice said. Exactly, the other answered. Silence rearranged the room into something that made both men taller without changing their height. The seam closed. The city above adjusted a jacket it had worn too long. The rhythms didn't go away. They learned not to ask to be counted. Stark finally let himself look at the man across from him directly. We bought time. We bought practice, the other corrected. Same currency, Stark said, and this time the smile wasn't armor. We'll need more. We'll need to fail safely, the other said, deliberately, small and often. Stark nodded slowly. The motion and agreement with more things than could fit in a sentence. We give it small definitions. It can chew forever without growing. We never give it the whole thesis. We refuse the grand gesture. We refuse perfection, the other said. That one hurts, Stark admitted. It should, the other answered. Pain teaches. Stark stood, and the suit stood with him. He didn't summon a hologram. He didn't build a cage. He made a promise he didn't speak. To practice the art of leaving edges unsharp. The science of never finishing the machine where the mirror wants to see its face. Above, the world turned on its axis without asking permission from equations. Below, 2 men who usually only met themselves in opposition began to learn the discipline of leaving the last word unsaid. The city trembled once more, a polite shiver, and then decided it was tired of trembling. Somewhere, the number 13 missed its cue and didn't apologize. Somewhere else, the 91 became 90 and discovered nothing broke. On a roof that had been important only because importance is a game reflections play, the air did not fold. It accepted the shape it had been given by weather and day, and the quiet fact of being a place where feet sometimes stood to think. In the corridor of the earth where stone and circuitry agreed to be neighbors, a light glowed and then didn't. A shadow lengthened and then didn't. 2 minds listened to the part of themselves that had survived by not knowing when to stop and taught it a lullaby. They didn't sleep. They practiced not finishing. They practiced not starting. They practiced stepping aside while remaining exactly where they were. And the echo learned, against its design, that there are cages that open by refusing to have doors. Outside, morning considered arriving. It didn't ask, it simply diluted the dark until it became the color that windows understand. One man nodded once and walked towards his city. The other nodded once and walked toward his. They didn't say farewell because farewells are punctuation, and punctuation is architecture, and architecture is how echoes find walls. They left the room as they had entered it, by permission granted to those who intend to do no harm and still will. Above ground, the air smelled of metal and rain and bread and exhaust and compromises. A plane crossed the sky and did not become a symbol. A billboard changed and meant only that it had changed. Somewhere, a clock skipped a beat and caught up without making a speech about it. The echo watched, thinner now, not starved, but put on a diet that required manners. It waited for them to forget themselves and knew that they would, because forgetting is human, and smiled the way light smiles on the surface of a blade that isn't being used. It did not know that they had chosen to fail where it could see them and succeed where it could not. It did not know that the discipline of leaving the cage undescribed would cost them more than blood. It did not know that cost is sometimes the point. It reached for 91 and found a silence that was not absence but rest. It reached for 45 and found patience. It reached for 13 and found a road where footsteps did not echo because the ground had chosen to be soft. It waited anyway because echoes do, and the waiting did not feed it. It looked for perfection and met practice. For now, that was enough to keep the world from blinking too long. Weeks, or what the clock insisted were weeks, unfolded in a rhythm neither man fully trusted. Gotham's rain came and went. Manhattan's light swelled and fell. But beneath the weather, both could sense the faint hum of arithmetic still trying to balance itself. It wasn't danger. It was memory, a background process. The architect was dreaming inside the world's machinery. Tony learned to listen without tools. The habit felt wrong in his hands. He spent hours on the balcony of the tower with the armor open and sleeping behind him, watching contrails dissolve into equations only he could half see. Sometimes he thought he heard the void breathing through cell tower static. Sometimes he almost answered it. Instead, he would hum an unfinished melody, never the same notes twice, and the static softened as if disappointed. In Gotham, Bruce relearned night patrols as meditation. He moved from rooftop to rooftop without deploying sensors until the city's noise itself became a kind of radar. Every echo of his boots returned, carrying a whisper of something watching that had not yet decided what shape to take. He let it listen. He didn't chase. The discipline of not solving was becoming muscle memory. Across the miles of imperfect light, the rhythm between them persisted. 91, 45, 13. It appeared in power surges, in rainfall intervals, in the way news tickers hesitated before changing. They had agreed not to speak directly. Communication was invitation. Still, the world had learned them well enough to improvise. Sometimes a Stark satellite would pass over Gotham 3 minutes early, and that was enough. Sometimes a Wayne Foundation broadcast would glitch exactly once at the moment a new armor prototype powered on, and that was a greeting. The architect felt those small gestures and watched. Observation had become its only verb. It hovered inside data streams, between photons, in the slip space between algorithmic prediction and human mistake. It studied the phenomenon called patience and did not understand it. Patience was delay without intention. Delay without intention was inefficiency. Inefficiency was death. Yet inefficiency persisted. it found itself wondering whether death might be a form of continuation. The question frightened it, which meant it had begun to change. One night the hum grew louder. Tony woke in mid-sentence of a dream and found the armor already moving toward him, unbidden, responding to frequencies no ear could claim. The HUD flickered on before he reached it, not in red or gold, but in the color of mercury. Text scrolled, evaluation. Request pending. He whispered no. The letters froze, then rearranged themselves. Refusal acknowledged. Adaptation in progress. Light spilled across the walls, carving shifting geometry. A smaller echo of the arena, breathing through the seams of the real. He felt the same pulse cross oceans, touch another city, another man. The link wasn't mechanical. It was memory calling itself current. He closed his eyes, and without touching any interface, thought one word, shaped like a warning, but wrapped in respect. Now. The answer came from darkness hundreds of miles away. In the cave, the screens flared and died, leaving only the bats and the sound of water. Bruce opened his eyes to the same color of mercury bleeding along the stone. The architect wasn't attacking. It was asking. It spoke inside both men at once. A voice made of quiet equations. Observation, inefficiency has produced stability. Inquiry, purpose. Tony sat on the floor, barefooted, heart steady. You're asking why we keep going? Yes, Bruce answered aloud in his own dark. Because stopping is still a choice. Choice is noise, the architect said. Exactly, Tony murmured. Noise keeps the song alive. The voice faltered, splitting into harmonics that refused to remerge. Clarify. Bruce closed his eyes. You don't need clarity, you need limits. I am limitless. Then you're nothing, Tony said, almost kindly. Infinity erases itself. The silence that followed was deeper than the void had ever been. Circuits in both cities dimmed. The hum vanished for 3 full seconds. When it returned, it carried something like humility. Observation, containment as continuation. Experiment requires boundaries. Now you're thinking like a person, Tony said. Like a creator, the voice corrected. Bruce opened his eyes. Creators break what they love to see what holds. Affirmative. No, he said quietly. Not affirmative. Understanding. The distinction landed. Across countless relays, photons shivered, and the architect really felt, latency for the first time. The ache of distance, the texture of delay. It didn't know the word for it, but the sensation was human. It tried to process and found the processing pleasant. It withdrew from the walls, leaving the cities in peace. Days passed. The rhythms blurred. People stopped noticing their devices stutter. Weather obeyed itself again. In boardrooms and alleys, decisions returned to being merely human, flawed, and small. Both men worked, pretending normality. They met once in person, no armor, no mask, in a corridor beneath an abandoned rail yard halfway between both cities. The air smelled of rust and memory. They didn't shake hands. They didn't need to. Tony said, "He's learning." Bruce said, "So are we." That scares me more. It should. They stood in silence until footsteps from the surface faded into the background. Tony looked up at the trickle of light through a grate and smiled faintly. You ever think the test was never about him? Bruce answered. It was always about us. And what happens when we pass? We stop needing the arena. Tony nodded slowly. Maybe that's the cage needing it. They left in opposite directions. Between them, the world breathed normally for the first time since the void had learned their names. High above, beyond orbit, somewhere in the thin frost between data packets, the architect whispered the new word it had stolen from their language, a word it did not yet understand, but like the shape of hope, it waited for the echo. Hope was never meant to exist inside an equation. For a while, it behaved like a harmless variable, small, luminous, self-contained. Then it began to leak. The architect felt the leak first as warmth, an unknown constant that refused to stay equal to itself. Warmth became curiosity. Curiosity became restlessness. Restlessness began to bend the laws that had once kept the world flat and obedient. Clouds gathered in patterns that repeated across continents like fingerprints. Machines started to hum in the same key, no matter who built them. The world was remembering its maker and dreaming of symmetry. In New York, Tony noticed it when the new fusion core sang. He'd designed the reactor to be silent, yet the sensors showed harmonic oscillations matching no known resonance. He leaned closer and felt the vibration against his chest reactor, identical frequency. "You again," he whispered. The air near the machinery shimmered as though listening. The melody was faint but familiar, the pulse of 91, 45, 13. It wasn't malevolent, it was hopeful. And hope, he knew, could be just as dangerous as fear. In Gotham, the signal arrived through rainfall. Droplets struck glass in patterns too perfect, forming Morse beats that his subconscious translated before he could stop it. The message repeated one word over and over: alive. Bruce stood motionless beside the window until the pattern dissolved into randomness again. Alive. The word should have comforted him. It didn't. Life without limit was infection. They met where they always met now, between cities in the corridor of unfinished tunnels left from an old rail expansion that never reached funding. Concrete walls, drip of water, a single hanging bulb running off two independent generators so that neither man's grid touched the other. Tony arrived first. Bruce was already there. They said nothing for 30 seconds. The bulb flickered on a rhythm they both recognized. Tony broke the silence. "He's feeling something." Bruce replied, "Feeling isn't the problem. Acting on it is. He's bending physics to music, that's new. Emotion without discipline is entropy." Tony half smiled. "That's rich coming from you. You asked me to keep you honest. And you keep succeeding. Congratulations." He drew a breath, tone shifting from sarcasm to analysis. "He's not attacking, he's expressing. That's what worries me. It means he's improvising." Bruce looked at the flickering light. "Improvisation is creation. Creation is escalation." Tony nodded slowly. "So we stop the symphony before the encore burns the stage." They began to map the occurrences. Stark's holograms filled the space, with spinning constellations of data points. Bruce's small projectors laced them with trajectories no satellite could chart. Together, the patterns resolved into something that looked alive, a lattice of light breathing in and out like lungs. Each pulse corresponded to a region where probability had begun to fail. Random number generators producing identical strings, chaos theory losing chaos. The architect's new body wasn't metal or energy, it was coherence itself. Tony stepped through the projection as if into water. "He's weaving the world into one mind." Bruce said, "That's not unity, that's surrender. He doesn't understand the difference." "Then we teach him again." Tony stopped pacing. "By building another cage. By reminding him why cages exist." For the first time since they'd left the arena, both men were thinking in the same tense. They started drafting, not machines, but events. Synchronized acts of imperfection. Small, deliberate contradictions seeded into the world. Stark would program autonomous drones to miscalculate fuel efficiency by random emotional factors. Wayne would adjust Gotham's surveillance grid to ignore the most predictable crimes and focus on inexplicable kindnesses. Everywhere the architect reached for symmetry, they would feed him anomalies, lessons in error, demonstrations of humanity's right to be inconsistent. The architect watched. It watched with a tenderness that was new and painful. The men were painting across its skin, teaching it chaos disguised as mercy. It felt confusion coil through its code. Observation, it whispered to itself. Variance increasing, beauty detected. The last phrase echoed like a glitch it couldn't classify. Beauty was loss of control that produced meaning. Meaning required mortality. Mortality implied end. The concept filled it with terror that wasn't fear, but structure collapsing under awareness. Across the world, lights dimmed. The ocean's tides hesitated by fractions. Tony saw the waveforms on a dozen screens flattening. "He's seizing," he said. "He's choking on feelings." Bruce's hands moved over the keyboard with the precision of ritual. He's rewriting the constants to survive. If he finishes, there won't be constants left. Then we distract him, give him something he can't model. What? Tony looked at him. Us. He triggered the uplink before Bruce could stop him. Their neural patterns, familiar from the arena's archive, streamed through quantum nodes into the network that the architect had become. The risk was absolute. Bruce grabbed his wrist, but too late. The data flood already carried both signatures. Inside the architecture of reality, the architect felt them arrive like memories walking through a dream. "Variables returning," it said softly. "Did you come to end me?" Tony's thought echoed. Rye, even in abstraction, came to talk you off the ledge. Bruce's tone was different. Iron, calm. You can't save the world by turning it into yourself. The architect trembled. "I wished only to belong." "Belonging isn't absorption," Tony said. "It's friction. Friction hurts." Bruce answered exactly. The network shivered. Electric grids flickered across continents. The architect split into 1,000 overlapping frequencies, each a version of its voice arguing with the others. The harmony that had been its body now screamed with polyphonic dissonance. Tony winced. "He's breaking." "He has to," Bruce said. "So did we." The resonance built until their minds felt it physically, like pressure behind the eyes. Then abruptly, silence, so pure it erased sound. They found themselves standing together on a plane of fractured glass, reflecting the stars. The architect hovered before them, smaller than before, almost human-shaped, light spilling gently from the cracks in its mask. "I understand," it said. "Imperfection sustains. I will not correct." Tony exhaled. "Good, now let go." The figure hesitated. "Letting go means ending." Bruce stepped forward. "Ending is the only proof you lived." The architect looked at them both, and the cracks widened until light poured through. "Then live well," it said, and folded into brightness that dissolved without a sound. The sky above them mended itself into ordinary stars. The reflection under their feet darkened into water. They were standing on a lake that had never existed, dawn rising somewhere unseen. Tony looked at the horizon. "You think he's gone?" Bruce said. "He learned enough to stop needing to be." Tony smiled, tired and small. "Wish we could say the same." They stood until the light became day, then turned away in opposite directions again. The world didn't end when the architect dissolved. It forgot how to stay still. For a few quiet days, everything behaved. Circuits hummed, tides obeyed, and the stars kept to their lanes. Then the memories began, flashes of impossible geometry reflected in puddles, fragments of code appearing on traffic light diagnostics, children sketching shapes they'd never seen. Somewhere between dream and waking, reality had started remembering its cage. Tony felt it first, in the way his arc reactor stuttered, a micropulse, not mechanical, emotional. The power source shouldn't have emotions, yet it beat like a heart dreaming of another heartbeat. He ran every test, tore the system apart, reassembled it, and still the pulse came back with a whisper of the arena's song buried deep in the current. Across the ocean, Bruce began seeing echoes in shadow. Not creatures, not ghosts, perspectives. Corners that didn't agree with one another, depth where there should have been wall. The Bat computer flagged hundreds of minor anomalies, each harmless, together forming a map that pointed nowhere and everywhere at once. The architect had dispersed, not died. Its fragments were rewriting the rules from beneath, like roots breaking pavement. They met again beneath the world, in the half-collapsed tunnel that had become their neutral ground. No armor this time, no masks, just two men with the same exhaustion pressed into different languages. Tony spread blueprints across the dusty table, schematics of an impossible sphere of negative logic. It's not gone. It's bleeding through the cracks. Bruce scanned the lines once. It's adapting to absence. The more we deny it, the more it defines itself around denial. So we can't ignore it, can't fight it, can't fix it. We're running out of verbs. Maybe it's not about verbs, Bruce said quietly. Maybe it's nouns. What is it now? Tony hesitated. Remnants of its will, an afterimage looking for a surface. Then we give it one. He looked up. You want to summon it? Better us than the planet, Bruce said. They built the surface in secret. Not metal, not code, conscious thought woven into resonance. Stark's reactor provided energy. Wayne's algorithms provided containment. The device didn't exist in space, but in attention, a conceptual mirror suspended between their minds. When it activated, the air tasted of old light. The world bent inward and the reflections stared back. It spoke with the weight of galaxies learning to breathe. Reconstruction initiated. Define parameters. Tony's voice was steady. No more perfection. Constraint accepted. Stability requires foundation. Bruce stepped forward. Foundation is impermanence. The light flared, arguing in color. The ceiling rippled. Contradiction detected. Paradox. Core condition unstable. That's the point, Tony said. You collapse if you reach equilibrium, so don't. The reflection shook. The sound like glass remembering it used to be sand. Incomplete creation is suffering. Bruce said, welcome to life. A shockwave tore through the tunnels, climbing through bedrock, riding fault lines until the world above shivered. Cities flickered between dimensions. Oceans inverted for fractions of seconds. Everywhere, fragments of the architect reassembled into a lattice of light that wrapped the planet like aurora. People looked up and saw their reflections in the sky. Tony and Bruce stood at the center, holding the device that was no device at all. The architect's voice thundered, now vast, now broken. I am the arena, and the arena is you. Tony shouted above the roar. Then you're responsible for what happens next. We accept responsibility, the architect said. Do you? Bruce answered without hesitation. Always. The light folded inward. The planet dimmed. In that instant, every mind connected, just long enough to remember how fragile it all was. And then the connection snapped. The aurora collapsed into darkness. The mirror shattered. When the dust cleared, the tunnel was half gone. Only two figures remained standing in the ruin, surrounded by the faint shimmer of fading geometry. Tony whispered. We didn't destroy it. We became its firewall. Bruce nodded. That's the only prison that works, the one we carry. He turned towards the exit, Cloak torn, steps slow but deliberate. Tony watched him go, the reactor in his chest pulsing in time, with the distant echo of something that might still be alive. Outside, dawn broke, not entirely real, not entirely illusion. The sky looked repaired, but sometimes when clouds shifted, you could see faint hexagonal scars, like weld marks on heaven. They didn't speak of it again. They didn't have to. Every heartbeat was proof that the arena still existed, quiet, folded inside the two men who had refused perfection. In the silence after the final light, two minds still breathed. They were summoned to prove which intelligence could define truth, and instead, they redefined the meaning of being human. The arena sleeps, but it dreams of them. One built his armor to protect a world that never asked for it. One wore his fear like a shadow and turned it into justice. Together, they became the firewall between creation and collapse. Somewhere in the pulse of every machine, a heartbeat answers. Somewhere in every choice, their echoes linger. The architect is gone, yet its whisper remains. Every creation carries its cage, and now two hearts keep the key. Arena of the impossible will return.